Listen!
Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and as the title suggests, we have an exciting theory to discuss today. But I want to point out that this is a theory. I do not know what is going to happen. I'm not even 100% sure I believe this is what is going to happen. It's not a prediction necessarily, but there are things about this theory that are compelling me to make this video. There are things about this that make sense that are coming together, and that's what we're talking about today. This theory that Nintendo Switch 2, or whatever Nintendo will call their next big system to follow up the Switch, and Metroid Prime 4 could be coming out together March of 2024. But before we go further, let me point out that we are aiming to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. With your help, it just might be possible. And to also put out this reminder that we've recently partnered with Instant Gaming. It's a site where you can buy digital codes for games for cheap. So for example, if you want some cheaper eShop points, you can go to this site. It's linked in the description below. And if you decide to do it there, it will help out the channel a little bit. With that all said, let's now start building the case for this theory. So some of you may be aware that there's been a lot of Nintendo Switch 2 news as of late. It feels like this news cycle for Switch 2 is heating up, but it also could be said that it's a bit cyclical, it comes and goes. But as of this last week or so, a few different things have popped up. So for example, a transcript came back from Nintendo's fiscal earnings report, their Q&A, and basically here, Shuntaro Furukawa said that Nintendo would be attempting to transition over their Nintendo accounts. Which really should come as no surprise because Nintendo's talked about this multiple times before. But what a lot of media outlets have been implying with this news is that backwards compatibility is likely. Which I also agree with. I think backwards compatibility is likely. I think Switch 2 will be able to play Switch games. We've talked about this for a while, but the reason this may be relevant is just because Nintendo is talking about things when it comes to their next system during their fiscal earnings. And it should also be said that they are only anticipating 15 million Switches sold for this fiscal year. We've been on a downward trend for Switch sales for a couple of years now, and historically speaking, when that's happened, a new system comes around. But we've also gotten a lot of reports this week from different media outlets that we have an idea of what Switch 2 specs are. And there's a little bit of misleading information going around about this, but I do feel like we do have an idea, but this was kind of something that's been rumored and suggested for a while already. But basically, because of this big sort of legal debate going on between Microsoft and Sony and the FTC and all of this about Call of Duty being playable on Switch and maybe the next system, some things have been said, apparently, by Bobby Kotick. So this quote I have here reads, "Given closer alignment of Gen 8 platforms in our previous offerings on PS4 and Xbox One, it's reasonable to assume we can make something compelling for next generation Switch as well." And this is the line where many are thinking, oh, okay, so Switch 2 is going to be around the power of PS4 and Xbox One, where they say closer alignment. But the way it's said is very vague. We don't have a really solid idea of where it is exactly. And this is supported by what he says later on. "I actually think we will likely make a Call of Duty game for a new Nintendo console. I can't tell you there are specific plans, but I can tell you it's something we'd consider. We would consider it once we had the specs, but we don't have them at present. We missed out on the opportunity for this past generation of Switch, but we'd have to wait until the specifications. We don't have any present plans to do so." So there he's flat out saying he doesn't have these specs yet. But this could be alluding to specific specs, and he may have a general understanding of where the Switch 2 will be, as suggested by that initial closer alignment of Gen 8 platforms quote. And the takeaway for here in the context of this theory is that it's looking like developers outside of Japan are at least already having conversations with Nintendo about what their next hardware is going to be. There may not be solid numbers yet on it all, but they have a rough idea. Now, a counter argument for this theory of Switch 2 coming out in March is that we don't have like solid info on development kits yet, and typically leading up to release for a new piece of hardware, we would have development kits. But in the case of Nintendo Switch 2, I think there may be some key differences. One, Nintendo continues to go down this path of having really short intervals between announcement and release. But also two, just because we haven't heard anything doesn't mean they don't exist. It's possible if Nintendo's planning to have a very smooth transition where Switch 1 is going to stay relevant for years into Switch 2's lifecycle, the same way 3DS is still getting the Nintendo published titles into 2019, then they're not going to have every single developer transition really early on. They're going to want developers making games for Switch for some time to come, especially if more people are going to have a Switch than a Switch 2. And if it's backwards compatible, then there's even less reason to worry about getting developers already working on Switch 2, but also, it isn't like Nintendo wouldn't have developers working on Switch 2, they would, but a lot of those may be closer partners that they can trust where leaks are less likely. For example, Square Enix, Capcom, developers in Japan. What's interesting about a lot of leaks and rumors that pop out from Nintendo outside of like information on directs that are like a day beforehand, we don't really learn about the inner workings of their projects unless there's some sort of Western developer or team involved. If it's something that's contained within Japan, it doesn't get out as often. That all said, if we don't start hearing about dev kits relatively soon, I would say within the next 6 months or so, I'll be doubting this theory that it could happen in March. But there's still time. Now, something else that's popped up recently that makes it feel like Switch 2 could be really soon, it's something that's come up regarding Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope. A Ubisoft CEO, Guillemot, said, "Although I think it was a different issue with Mario, we had already released a Mario Rabbids game on Switch, so by doing another, we had two similar experiences on one machine. On Nintendo, games like this never die. There are 25 Mario games on Switch. Nintendo advised that it's better to do one iteration on each machine. We were a bit too early, and we should have waited for the next console." So here it's being lamented that they released Sparks of Hope too soon, and they should have waited a bit longer for Nintendo's next console. And that's what's interesting. This use of a bit too early, implying that they only had to wait just a little bit more. Sparks of Hope came out last year, and if the system's not coming out this year, which seems pretty likely, how much further out could it be? March might fit this idea of just a little bit more. Which brings me to a very fascinating rumor that has not been disproven yet. Do you remember earlier in the year when we had the announcement of the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet DLC, and there was this leaker that leaked out all the details of the DLC, but also mentioned something about a new Switch model that's actually a next-gen console, and that there's supposed to be some sort of graphics enhancement patch releasing alongside the second DLC wave in 2024. Well, the second wave of Scarlet and Violet's DLC isn't coming out till next year, it looks like, because the first wave isn't coming out until this holiday, and the final wave, the second wave, the Indigo Disc, isn't slated until this winter, which technically could mean maybe this December, but more likely in the first few months of next year. And when this news initially came out, there was discussion, oh, maybe Nintendo would push out a holiday release for Switch 2 because winter could technically count 2023, but it also could mean maybe by March. And now that we've gotten the recent Nintendo Direct and we're getting Mario Bros. Wonder and Mario RPG as the holiday games, it seems pretty clear that Nintendo's not pushing out Switch 2 this year. That seems pretty obvious. But what about 4 months later, in March, to close out the fiscal year, the same way they came out with the original Switch back in March of 2017. So maybe this rumor is valid, and there are going to be some DLC upgrades planned, or graphics enhancement patches planned, for March of 2024, because there'll be more powerful out there that'll be running some of these games, because it will be backwards compatible. But if a new Switch that's more powerful, that's a next generation leap, comes out this upcoming March, there's going to need to be games. And with Mario Bros. Wonder coming out in October, and Mario RPG coming out in November, It doesn't seem likely that Nintendo would turn around and launch a new 3D Mario just a few short months later. I would guess that would be a big holiday release. But I could be wrong on that. I mean, for the most part, I've been predicting that 3D Mario would be the launch title for Switch 2. But as the title suggests, I'm arguing something different this time. So while 3D Mario definitely makes a lot of sense, I don't think it makes sense for a Switch 2 release this March. And while it might be a scary idea for Nintendo to not put out a 3D Mario or a new 3D Zelda to launch a system, if this system is meant to be treated as something that's going to be a smooth transition, maybe like a premium for a lot of Switch owners who want more powerful graphics, but ultimately it's still going to be marketed in a way where it feels like it's part of the Switch family, then they don't need to start putting out exclusive games immediately day one. If your Switch games are going to play on this new system and they're going to look and run well, and new games coming up for the system will still be playable on Switch as well, then it may not be necessary. In some ways, this may feel like a mid-gen refresh. And I say that with air quotes even though I'm off camera. But it just may be a scenario where things are going to be treated a little bit differently. The way Nintendo's handled Switch as a whole has been different than prior generations. It's kind of hard to even distinguish where Switch is in terms of generations. And I think the reality situation is that things are just not that black and white. And our perspectives on what's a generation, what's a proper launch title, how should we transition over, all of that is going to be continually blurred as time goes on. But they're still going to want to have some big quality software to push the hardware somewhat. So what if that's Metroid Prime 4? And yes, I am a huge Metroid fan. I am very biased when it comes to Metroid. But there are still signs that Metroid Prime 4 is not that far off. I said many times that I've personally heard that Metroid Prime 4 is complete. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean it's just done collecting dust in a warehouse somewhere? Does that mean it's content complete but they're just polishing it up? Potentially. We did recently hear that Tears of the Kingdom was basically delayed a year even though it was complete so they could just polish it up and make sure it's good. I personally believe that's where Metroid Prime 4 is at right now. It's content complete, Nintendo's taking their time with the release, and they're just making sure it's a high quality title when it does finally come out. But when it finally comes out, could be this March. Why do I say that? Well, many of you may be familiar with this industry insider, Nate the Hate, and he said on different occasions that he believes Metroid Prime 4 will be coming out by the end of the fiscal year. This is what he's apparently heard. And by the end of the fiscal year would be March of 2024. And based off this recent Nintendo Direct that was meant to announce games for the second half of the year, with Metroid Prime 4 being a no-show there, assuming Nate the Hate is correct, Prime 4 is likely coming out in the first 3 months of next year. And if I had to bet, based off what kind of game I think Prime 4 is going to be, it's going to be a fiscal year ending kind of game. Now, I'm not saying Prime 4 is going to be a 30 million copy seller. That seems unlikely. But I'll also say that before Breath of the Wild, the best-selling Zelda games only sold 7 to 8 million. The Switch effect plus maybe a Switch 2 effect could push Metroid Prime 4 to a higher level. Instead of being a title that sells somewhere between 2 to 3 million, perhaps it will evolve and reach maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 million. And that would be a substantial number that will definitely help to conclude the fiscal year this March. And we've also seen Nintendo use Metroid to push new hardware before. They did so with Metroid Dread and Nintendo Switch OLED, and Metroid Dread wanted to sell 3 million plus copies, the best-selling Metroid ever, but that was a 2D Metroid. Prime 4 could potentially reach a higher level. Most 3D counterparts for Nintendo IP sell better on Switch. There's maybe going to be exception to Mario Bros. Wonder, we shall see, but in general, that's how it goes. And if you don't want to believe what I've heard, and if you don't want to believe Nate the Hate on Metroid Prime 4 potentially being done, because we have still seen hirings, of course, if they are polishing the game, as I've been suggesting, they're still going to be hiring, and if there's going to be DLC, they're still going to be hiring. And as we've seen with other projects such as Mortal Kombat 1, they're still going to be hiring until months before release. We do have evidence that some people are finishing up at Retro Studios. So Zach from Switchforce pointed this out to me during Nintendo Prime's podcast yesterday, but on LinkedIn, Andrew Faithful a creature artist at Retro Studios, will be done working there this July. That's when his contract ends. Now, with him finishing doesn't necessarily the game is done, but it might be the case that they are finishing up, as we suggested earlier. I'll also point out for like the millionth time if you've been watching all my different videos, with the release of Metroid Prime Remastered, it seems like Nintendo put that out there when they did, even though it's been done since summer of 2021, because they are close to release for Prime 4. They wouldn't just put out Prime Remastered with Prime 4 just being years away. It's close. And if Nate the Hate is correct, it could be coming out this March. And if that Pokemon leak is correct, and it hasn't been disproven, and it got all those details right about the DLC, maybe there will be a graphics patch put out for Pokemon around that time because Switch 2 will be ready around that time. Now, there are a lot of media outlets going around saying that Nintendo confirmed there will be no Switch hardware until April. I don't think that's actually the case. What's been said is that the 15 million systems sold forecast is just for Nintendo Switch systems, which technically could mean they could get to maybe 18 or 20 million if they have a Switch 2 system that could sell 3 to 5 million at launch. But at the end of the day, this is all just speculation. We don't know what's going to happen. Nikkei did report a few months ago that they're thinking that Switch 2 is coming out maybe sometime next summer, which would be after March, a few months later. But we won't know what's actually going to happen until Nintendo confirms something, which we're likely at least still a few months away. But assuming this theory is true, then they would probably have to announce this system before the end of the year. And the problem with doing that is that they want to sell Switch systems. But if the way the Switch 2 is going to be handled is that maybe it'll be something that will feel more just like a premium system in the family of Switch systems, then it's not going to necessarily ruin holiday sales, especially if Nintendo finally has a price drop for Nintendo Switch, which they have not done throughout this entire generation, which at this point is approaching 6.5 years. And come this holiday, it'll be more than 6.5 years. Which might be kind of fascinating. What if we do get a price drop for Switch this holiday? A lot of people who aren't interested in better graphics or what have you will buy more Switches this holiday, and they'll have great games to enjoy like Super Mario RPG and Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and of course Tears of the Kingdom. But then going into early next year, they'll have a more powerful system for those who have been waiting for such a long time, and they'll put out Prime 4 as a showcase for this system, and it'll give Metroid Prime 4 an interesting opportunity to capitalize on Switch sales because it'll likely be cross-gen, but also it'll be that kind of game that will be out there for those who want to get the true Switch 2 experience, and it may be evergreen for some time, and perhaps become the best-selling Metroid game ever. This would also give Nintendo an opportunity to sell a lot more Switch 2 systems, so once the holidays for 2024 come around, they can bring out an exclusive 3D Mario, and a lot more people could get their hands on that game. And March really is not that far off. Really, to me, any point during 2024 is fairly soon. But what do you guys make of this theory? Is it feasible? Is it unlikely? Do you think it's for sure happening? Do you doubt it? Or are there more reasons to believe it or not? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.